There's a moment, just one, when Tobey Maguire stood at the absolute top of Hollywood. The whole world knew his face. Kids wore his costume on Halloween. Studio executives were writing him checks with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. He was Spider-Man. He was Peter Parker. And then, almost without warning, he wasn't anything at all. No blockbusters. No award season buzz. No red carpets. Just silence. So what actually happened to the guy who once swung between skyscrapers on the biggest screens in the world? How does someone go from being Hollywood's golden boy to virtually disappearing from the industry entirely? Today, we are going to walk through the full story. The humble beginnings, the stunning rise, the personal demons, and the long, complicated fall of one of the most talented and self-destructive actors of his generation. This is a complete biography of Tobey Maguire. Tobias Vincent Maguire was born on June 27, 1975, in Santa Monica, California. From the very first chapter of his life, nothing was easy. His parents, Vincent Maguire, a cook, and Wendy Brown, a secretary, were barely adults themselves when Tobey arrived. His father was 20 years old, his mother just 18. The relationship was never stable, and before long, the two separated, leaving young Tobey to bounce between households in a way that would shape his psychology for years to come. In interviews, Tobey has described his childhood as something close to controlled chaos. He lived with his mother, then his father, then back with his mother and her sister, then with his father and his grandmother, and on it went in a cycle that offered very little in the way of security or roots. It was a transient, unstable upbringing, and while it gave Tobey a certain resilience and adaptability, it also left wounds that would surface later in life in ways nobody could have predicted. His mother, Wendy, was a woman with a deep love of cinema and theater. She believed strongly that acting was her son's calling, even when her son disagreed entirely. Young Tobey, perhaps in quiet rebellion against his mother's dreams, or perhaps simply following his own instincts, wanted to become a cook, just like his father. The irony is almost poetic given how that father figure would eventually disappear from his life, ending up incarcerated for robbery when Tobey was still a child. The turning point came when Tobey was choosing his high school electives. He selected home economics, a practical cooking course, entirely bypassing the drama and theater program that his mother had been pointing him toward for years. Wendy, unwilling to give up so easily, reportedly offered her son $100 to switch into the theater class instead. For a kid growing up without much money, that was a real sum. Tobey took the deal, and within a single year of studying acting, something clicked. He understood what his mother had seen all along. He dropped out of school, began auditioning, and started landing commercial work before most teenagers have held their first job. He would not officially pass his high school equivalency exam until the year 2000, by which point he was already one of the most talked about young actors in Hollywood. Tobey Maguire's earliest professional credits read like a masterclass in paying dues. He appeared in commercials for major brands, picked up bit parts on television series, including Roseanne and The Wizard, and gradually built a small but real presence in the entertainment industry. None of it was glamorous. Most of it went unnoticed by the general public. But every audition, every small role, every day on set was adding to foundation that would eventually hold something remarkable. What makes this period in Maguire's life especially interesting is who he was building it alongside. On the set of various television productions, Tobey met a young, equally unknown actor named Leonardo DiCaprio. The two formed a friendship that has lasted decades, one of the most enduring and genuine bonds in an industry not particularly known for loyalty. Their careers would intersect repeatedly, sometimes in ways that were triumphant, and at least once in ways that both men would spend years trying to forget. In 1993, Tobey landed his first significant film role in This Boy's Life, a drama directed by Michael Cotton Jones and starring Robert De Niro. The film told the story of a young man growing up under the roof of an abusive stepfather, and the lead role of the teenager at the center of the story was one that Tobey had genuinely hoped to play. That role ultimately went to DiCaprio, while Maguire was cast in the smaller but still meaningful part of Chuck Bolger, the protagonist's friend. It was a lesson in the brutal mathematics of Hollywood. Even when you are talented, Even when you are in the right room, someone else can walk through the door and take what you were reaching for. Tobey accepted it, did his job well, and moved forward. The mid-1990s were a difficult stretch. Roles came, but they were scattered and inconsistent. Tobey appeared in a handful of films and television productions that barely registered at the box office or with audiences. And then, quietly, things began to fall apart. The pressure of the industry, the uncertainty of the work, and the personal instability that had followed him since childhood caught up with him. He began drinking. By his own later admission, the problem became serious enough that he recognized it was actively damaging his work and his ability to be present on a set. In a moment of clarity, and with the encouragement of his close friend DiCaprio, Tobey sought help. He entered rehabilitation, stepped away from the worst of his habits, and returned to work with something closer to genuine focus. The late 1990s told a very different story. Beginning in 1997 with his role in Ang Lee's The Ice Storm, Tobey Maguire began demonstrating a depth and emotional intelligence on screen that critics could not ignore. The film, based on Rick Moody's novel of the same name, examined the fractured dynamics of suburban family life during the 1970s, and Tobey's portrayal of a teenager navigating desire, confusion, and a household slowly collapsing around him was genuinely affecting. Then came Pleasantville in 1998, directed by Gary Ross. The film was a clever, visually inventive story about a modern teenager who finds himself transported into the world of a 1950s black and white television program. As the world around him slowly bursts into color, literally and symbolically, Tobey anchored the film with performance that balanced warmth, humor, and genuine emotional weight. The film received nominations in 3 Oscar categories and earned Tobey the Saturn Award, his first major industry recognition. Critics noticed, audiences responded, and for the first time, it felt like the pieces were genuinely coming together. In the same year, Tobey appeared in a small but memorable role in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Terry Gilliam's wild adaptation of Hunter S. Thompson's novel. It was a brief turn, but it showed a willingness to disappear into a character and take risks that distinguish him from many actors his age. Sharing scenes with Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro, even in a minor capacity, was a statement of arrival. The Cider House Rules in 1999 cemented his status as one of the most compelling young dramatic actors working in Hollywood. Playing Homer Wells, an orphan raised by a doctor who performs illegal abortions and who eventually steps out into the wider world to find his own moral footing, Tobey delivered a performance of quiet, sustained power. The film received 7 Academy Award nominations. Tobey himself was not among the nominees, but his work was widely praised, and the film's success brought his name to an entirely new audience. Also in 1999, he starred in Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil, a Civil War drama in which he played a young partisan fighter confronting the realities of violence and loyalty. Then in 2000, he appeared alongside Michael Douglas in Wonder Boys, an adaptation of Michael Chabon's novel about a novelist in creative and personal crisis. The film was praised by critics, even if audiences were slower to embrace it. Tobey played a gifted, mysterious student whose presence complicates and illuminates the life of Douglas's character. It was a nuanced, understated performance, and it confirmed that Tobey Maguire was not simply a face that looked good on camera. He could act. He could really genuinely act. And then came the role that changed everything. When director Sam Raimi began the casting process for Spider-Man in the early 2000s, Tobey Maguire was not the first name on anyone's list. Several other actors were considered before Raimi landed on Maguire, but once he did, the decision held. There was something in Tobey, the quiet intensity, the everyman quality, the ability to make vulnerability look like strength, that fit Peter Parker in a way that felt almost inevitable in hindsight. Tobey had never read a Spider-Man comic before signing on to project. He agreed to the role because the script moved him, because the character's internal journey resonated with something in his own experience. And then the preparation began in earnest. He followed an intense physical training regimen for 5 months, transforming his body for a role that would require him to be credibly athletic and powerful. He studied the movement of arachnids with the help of research specialists. He trained in rock climbing and worked with professionals experienced in high-altitude physical work to develop the physical vocabulary of a character who spends much of his time climbing walls and dangling from buildings. The famous suit presented its own considerable challenges. Tobey has spoken openly about the discomfort of wearing the red and blue costume, which had to be essentially sewn onto him at the start of each working day due to issues with the zippers. Once sealed inside it, he could not eat, drink, or attend to basic physical needs without significant assistance. It was uncomfortable in ways that tested patience and professionalism in equal measure. The filming of the iconic upside-down kiss in rain, one of the most recognizable images from the entire franchise, was, by Tobey's own account, far from romantic in practice. Hanging inverted in the rain at 5 a.m, with water pouring into his nostrils, the experience was considerably less cinematic than what appeared on screen. But that dedication, that willingness to endure physical discomfort in pursuit of the right image, was part of what made the film work as well as it did. Spider-Man was released in 2002 and became one of the highest-grossing films of that year, breaking box office records and turning Tobey Maguire into a genuine global star overnight. He was on the cover of magazines. He was recognized everywhere he went. Offers flooded in. His fee for the sequel climbed dramatically. He was, by every conventional Hollywood measure, at the top. Spider-Man 2 arrived in 2004 and was received even more enthusiastically than the first film, with many critics declaring it one of the finest superhero films ever made at that point. The story dug deeper into Peter Parker's emotional life, his sacrifices, his loneliness, his struggle to reconcile his obligations as Spider-Man with his desires as a human being. Tobey brought extraordinary sensitivity to those scenes, and the film's success confirmed that the franchise was not a fluke. It was a genuine cultural phenomenon, and Tobey Maguire was its face. But fame, as Tobey himself has noted, is a test of character, and not everyone passes. The complications began quietly, then gathered speed. During preparations for Spider-Man 2, Tobey cited a back injury sustained while filming Seabiscuit as a reason to reduce his stunt work. Sony Pictures grew suspicious that the claim was being exaggerated as a negotiating tactic. The studio began exploring the possibility of recasting the role, with Jake Gyllenhaal emerging as the most prominent candidate. Eventually, Tobey walked back his position, acknowledged the injury was less severe than initially suggested, and filming proceeded. Sony, in a gesture of generosity that reads somewhat differently in retrospect, actually increased his compensation. The pattern repeated around Spider-Man 3 in 2007. There were disputes over money, demands regarding medical personnel on set, and overall atmosphere of tension between the actor and the production. The film itself, when it finally arrived, was a disappointment. The story was muddled, the tone inconsistent, and audiences who had loved the first two films left theaters with a sense of deflation. Even Sam Raimi later admitted that by the end of production, he had lost his own clarity about what the film was trying to accomplish. The failure of Spider-Man 3 seemed to accelerate something that had already been building. Tobey became increasingly consumed by gambling. He had been participating in high-stakes poker games for several years, but now the activity intensified, pulling him into circles and situations that carried real legal and reputational risks. In 2011, he was drawn into a lawsuit connected to a poker game in which one of the players had allegedly been using stolen money. Settling the case outside a court avoided a public trial, but the damage to his image was real and lasting. Alcohol, which he had battled and seemingly conquered in the mid-1990s, crept back into his life. The combination of gambling, substance problems, and a career that was no longer generating the kind of momentum it once had created a downward spiral that proved very difficult to reverse. In 2013, Tobey appeared in Baz Luhrmann's lavish adaptation of The Great Gatsby, playing Nick Carraway, the story's narrator and moral conscience. It was a high-profile project with a remarkable cast: Leonardo DiCaprio as Gatsby, Carey Mulligan as Daisy, and a reunion of the two old friends on screen generated genuine excitement. Tobey's Nick was measured and watchful, a steady presence in the film's sensory overload of spectacle. It was good work, but it was not the kind of career-defining role that changes the trajectory of a filmmaker's professional life. Before filming, Tobey admitted he had not previously read Fitzgerald's novel. He had grown up without much time or access for leisure reading, too focused on survival, and worked to develop that kind of literary habit. It is a detail that says something genuine about where he came from and what he had overcome to get where he was. But it also speaks to a certain disconnection from the cultural conversation happening around him. After The Great Gatsby, the roles became sparser. He appeared in a small part in Labor Day, directed by Jason Reitman in 2013. The following year, he joined the ensemble cast of The Spoils of Babylon, a television miniseries parody that failed to find a real audience. The reviews were unkind, and Tobey largely stepped back from television after that experience. He turned his attention toward production, establishing his own company, Material Pictures, and releasing several films under that banner. Rock of Ages, Pawn Sacrifice, in which he played chess prodigy Bobby Fischer in one of his more interesting late-career performances, and The Fifth Wave all came and went without making major impressions on audiences or at the box office. His voice work as a narrator in the animated film The Boss Baby in 2017 was his last widely seen credit for several years. Away from cameras and sets, Tobey's personal life followed its own complicated arc. In 2007, he married Jennifer Meyer, a jewelry designer, with whom he had 2 children, a daughter named Ruby Sweetheart and a son named Otis Tobias. By most accounts, the early years of their marriage were genuinely happy ones, but the pressures that had accumulated in his professional life were not easy to leave at the studio door. The gambling, the substance issues, and what various reports described as an inability to be fully present in the domestic life he had built eventually took their toll. In 2016, Jennifer filed for separation. The divorce was finalized the following year. Both Tobey and Jennifer have spoken publicly about their efforts to maintain a respectful, cooperative co-parenting relationship for the sake of their children, and by most accounts, they have succeeded in that goal. They have appeared together at family events and maintained a civility that speaks well of both of them. But the end of the marriage was, by any measure, a significant personal loss at a moment when his professional life was also at a low point. The moment that brought Tobey Maguire back to the consciousness of a global audience came in December 2021, when Spider-Man: No Way Home was released. For months, the internet had buzzed with speculation and rumor about whether both Maguire and Andrew Garfield, the 2 actors who had played Peter Parker in previous film series, would appear alongside Tom Holland's version of the character. Sony and Marvel played the speculation brilliantly, neither confirming nor denying until the film was in theaters. When the reveal finally came on screen, audiences erupted. The emotional weight of seeing 3 generations of Spider-Man sharing the same frame, and the genuine warmth and generosity that Maguire's older, more wounded version of Peter Parker brought to the story was something that even skeptical viewers found difficult to resist. For Tobey, it was a reminder of what he had once been, but also something more interesting than simple nostalgia. His Peter Parker in that film was older, quieter, carrying the marks of years of difficult living. It felt, in its own strange way, entirely authentic. No Way Home became one of the highest-grossing films in cinema history, and Tobey Maguire's involvement was a significant part of its emotional and commercial success. Whether that appearance will translate into a genuine career renaissance remains to be seen. The film Babylon, directed by Damien Chazelle and featuring an ensemble cast, including Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie, offered another high-profile opportunity. But the question of whether Tobey Maguire can sustain a second act in Hollywood remains genuinely open. The story of Tobey Maguire is not a simple cautionary tale, though it contains cautionary elements. It is also not a straightforward redemption narrative, though it contains moments of genuine recovery. What it is, perhaps most accurately, is the story of a person of enormous natural talent who came from very little, climbed to heights that few ever reach, and discovered, as many do, that height alone does not guarantee stability. He overcame addiction once in his 20s and faced it again in his 30s. He built a family and lost a marriage. He made films that will be remembered and films that are better forgotten. He created, at the peak of his powers, a version of a beloved fictional character so complete and so human that audiences are still arguing about it 20-plus years later. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. Whatever comes next for Tobey Maguire, more films, a quiet life away from cameras, or some combination of both, the full story of who he is and what he's been through is far more interesting than either the heights or the fall taken in isolation. because it is a whole arc, unedited and unfiltered, that tells you something real about a person. And Tobey Maguire, whatever else he is undeniably real.